Nora Callahan was not the kind of woman who stopped. Not for traffic, not for weather, not for the particular kind of bone-deep exhaustion that had been sitting behind her eyes for the last 3 hours like a dull, persistent thumb. She had driven through worse. She had worked through worse. Stopping was something other people did when they ran out of options. At 11:47 p.m., on a two-lane highway somewhere in the hill country of West Virginia, Nora ran out of options. The GPS had died 14 minutes earlier. Not dramatically, not with a warning, just a quiet freeze mid-sentence, the digital voice cutting off between turn and left, and the screen fading to a flat, unhelpful gray. She had driven on instinct since then, following the road because the road was all there was. Black asphalt, wet from earlier rain, flanked on both sides by dense tree lines that pressed close enough to make the headlights feel smaller than they were. She felt the tire before she heard it. A slow leftward pull, subtle at first, easy to dismiss as road camber or wind, but persistent. She gripped the wheel tighter, and the pull answered with more pull. She eased onto the gravel shoulder and stepped out into air that was cold and damp and smelled like pine and wet earth. The rear left tire was not flat, not yet, but the tread along the outer edge had begun separating. A clean, deliberate-looking split that she knew from experience meant she had, generously, 15 miles before the situation became undrivable. She checked her phone. 1 bar, then none. The nearest town, according to the last screen she'd seen before the GPS died, was 22 miles east. She stood on the shoulder of an empty highway at midnight, in the kind of dark that cities never produce, and did the math. The math was not encouraging. That was when she saw the light. Not bright, not beckoning, just a faint orange smear through the tree line approximately a quarter mile ahead, the kind of glow that suggested electricity rather than fire. She got back in the car and drove toward it slowly, the damaged tire dragging with quiet insistence against the wet road. The sign emerged from the dark like a held breath finally released. Stillwater Inn. Vacancy. Color TV. Cash only. Handwritten addendum on a separate placard below. Office open late. One corner of the sign was dark. A dead bulb, unreplaced. The rest of the lettering pulsed in that faint orange, steady and low, the way old neon does when it's been running for decades without maintenance. The motel itself sat back from the road, a single-story L-shaped structure, maybe 12 rooms, with a cracked asphalt lot and a wooden awning running the length of the building. Nora almost kept driving. She didn't. 3 vehicles occupied the lot. A rusted estate car parked neatly near the office. A pickup truck with a long crack splitting its rear windshield. And one car, a dark blue saloon, parked at a diagonal near the lot's center, its driver's door standing open. Interior light on. Engine off. Completely empty. Nora sat in her car for a moment and looked at it. Then she looked away. She grabbed her bag and walked to the office. The office was a glass-fronted box barely large enough for the desk inside it. The man behind the counter was reading a newspaper folded into careful quarters, and he looked up at the sound of the door with an expression that suggested he'd heard her coming long before she arrived. He was older, mid-70s, she guessed. Gray cardigan, wire-frame glasses, neat in the particular way of someone with few possessions and strong habits. He smiled. Mouth only. Rough night for driving, he said. Tire trouble, Nora said. I need 1 room. Just until morning. Room 9's available. Quiet end of the building. He named a price. She paid cash. He produced a key from a drawer, brass, old-fashioned, heavier than she expected, and slid it across the counter without standing up. Are there other guests? She asked. A pause. Brief enough that she almost missed it. A few. She nodded toward the lot. The car with the open door. Guests stepped out for air, he said. He does that. He had already returned to his newspaper. She took the key. The walkway running along the front of the rooms was lit by a string of overhead bulbs, alternating working and dead, which gave the corridor a stuttering, uneven quality, pools of dim light separated by stretches of dark. Nora walked past rooms 5 and 6, both dark and silent. Past room 7, where a thin line of warm amber light bled under the door and where, barely audible through the wall, a woman was humming. Slow, tuneless, repeating. Nora stopped walking. She stood outside room 7 for 3 full seconds, her key in her hand, her bag on her shoulder, listening to the sound. It wasn't distressed. It wasn't loud. It was the sound of someone doing something automatic, the way people hum when they've forgotten their humming. She kept walking. Room 9 was clean in a surface-level way, the kind of clean that suggested recent wiping rather than genuine hygiene. Floral bedspread in a pattern that had been dated 20 years ago. Bolted television. A bathroom with a shower curtain that didn't quite reach the floor on the left side. She checked the window, standard latch, functional, and wedged the desk chair under the door handle with the efficiency of someone who had listened to enough true crime to make it a habit rather than a choice. She plugged in her phone. The charging indicator flickered twice, then held. She lay on top of the covers fully dressed. Through the wall beside her, room 8, silence. On the other side, nothing but the end of the building and the dark beyond it. The humming was coming from further down the corridor, room 7, bleeding through walls and distance both, still tuneless, still repeating. She told herself it was a television. A radio left on. Something with a mundane explanation that she'd feel slightly embarrassed for overthinking in the morning. She almost believed it. Somewhere around 12:30 a.m., her eyes closed. At 1:14 a.m., the humming stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow heavier than the sound had been. Not peaceful, dense. The kind of silence that isn't the absence of noise but the presence of something that has decided to be quiet. Nora opened her eyes. She was staring at the ceiling when the knock came. Single. Firm. Her door. She sat up. Waited. The clock on the nightstand read 1:14. Nothing followed the knock. No voice. No second knock. No footsteps retreating. Just the knock, and then the heavy silence again. She didn't open the door. She went to the window instead, easing the curtain back 2 inches with one finger. The parking lot sat under the weak orange wash of the motel sign. The rusted estate car. The pickup. The blue saloon with its doors still open, interior light still burning. And at the far edge of the lot, where the asphalt met the tree line, a man. Dark coat. Hands at his sides. Completely still. Facing her window directly. She let the curtain fall. She stood with her back against the wall and concentrated on breathing at a normal rate. There were reasonable explanations. A guest. Someone getting air. Someone who happened to be standing still in that direction at that moment. At 1:31 a.m., the humming from room 7 resumed. But it had changed. It was no longer tuneless. It had acquired the shape of words. Not quite words, more the architecture of them. Like someone reciting something in a language that had once been English and had since become something older and less patient. And then, cutting through it, clear and small and wrong in every possible way, a child's voice. She can't leave, it said. She already tried. Nora was standing at her door before she knew she'd moved. She had the chair out from under the handle. She had her hand on the latch. Every reasonable, pragmatic, data-driven instinct she possessed was firing at maximum volume, telling her to sit back down and wait for morning and find a rational explanation in the daylight. She opened the door anyway. The corridor was empty. The stuttering overhead bulbs threw their uneven light across the walkway. Pools of dim yellow separated by stretches of dark, and in every one of those pools, nothing. No figure, no retreating footsteps, not even the sound of a door closing. Just the corridor and the night beyond the lot, and from somewhere down the building's length, the humming. Nora stood in her doorway and looked toward room 7. The amber light still bled under the door. The sound reached her clearly, more clearly than it should have, she thought, given the distance. 2 rooms of concrete and plaster between her and it, and still it arrived at her ears as though the walls were suggestions rather than barriers. The words, if they were words, shifted and rearranged each time she tried to isolate them, like a sentence she kept reading wrong. She told herself she was going to knock, ask if everything was all right. The reasonable, neighborly thing. She was at the door before the argument with herself had finished. She knocked twice. Firm. Waited. The humming continued without interruption. She tried the handle. It opened. The room was the same layout as hers. She registered that first. Same door position, same window opposite, same bathroom door on the left. Same bones. Everything else was wrong. The bedspread was a different pattern. Older, the color almost entirely faded, as though it had been washed several hundred more times than the one in room 9. The television was a smaller model, the boxy analog type she hadn't seen outside a thrift store in 15 years. It was on, screen filled with static, but producing no sound at all. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, full, perfectly still. The woman was in the chair by the window, back to the door, rocking slightly, with the slow, metronomic steadiness of someone who had been doing it long enough that it had stopped being a choice. "Hello," Nora said. The humming continued. The rocking continued. Nora crossed the room slowly. The carpet made no sound under her feet. She came around the side of the chair far enough to see the woman's profile. 40s, she estimated. Dark hair, wearing clothes that felt slightly off in a way Nora couldn't immediately name. Not costume, not unusual, just a half-step removed from current, like a photograph taken years ago of someone dressed normally for that year. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were open and fixed on the window. Outside the window, from this angle, Nora could see the parking lot clearly. The estate car, the pickup, the blue saloon with its door still hanging open. And at the far edge of the lot, the man in the dark coat. Still there, still facing the building with that absolute, patient stillness. The woman spoke without turning. "He's been there since I checked in," she said. Her voice was conversational, distant, in the way of someone narrating something happening to another person. "I thought he was waiting for someone. I kept looking to see if anyone came for him." "How long have you been here?" Nora asked. "Tuesday," the woman said. Nora looked at her phone. No signal still, but the date display in the corner of the screen read clearly. "Friday." The word landed in her chest, like something dropped from a height. "You need to come with me," Nora said. "Right now? We're leaving." She reached for the woman's shoulder. Her hand met resistance. Not physical, not the solid resistance of bone and muscle, but something closer to pressure, like pushing against a current moving in the opposite direction. The woman didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the contact, just kept rocking, kept her eyes on the window, kept her hands folded with that terrible, settled patience. "I tried that," the woman said quietly. "Leaving. The first night, when I still could." "What stopped you?" A pause. The static on the old television shifted, just for a moment, into something that was almost an image. Grainy, high angle, like footage from a camera mounted above the parking lot. Nora stared at it. The image showed a woman standing at the edge of the lot. Then it showed a figure at a window. Then, and this was the one that locked Nora's breath in her throat, it showed the interior of room 9. Her bag on the floor, her jacket on the bed, the chair wedged under the door handle. The motel had been watching her since she arrived. "Looking at him," the woman said. "That's what stops you. Every time you really look, not glance, really look, it pulls tighter, like a knot." Nora's mind went back to the parking lot. The curtain she'd peeled back 2 inches. The man at the tree line, facing her window. She had looked directly at him. "You've looked at him twice," the woman said, almost gently. "I counted. I count now. It's something to do." The television static surged, and the image disappeared. "Don't look again," the woman said. "Leave now, and don't look at the lot when you go. I'm not leaving you here. You can't take me." Still no emotion. Just the rocking. Just the window. "I'm already part of it. I think I have been since Wednesday. I just didn't know what that meant until Thursday." The humming began again. Not from the woman's mouth, from the walls. Low, resonant, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The sound filling the room the way water fills a low space. Nora ran. She hit the corridor at full stride, not looking left, not looking toward the lot. Eyes fixed on the far end of the walkway, where room 9's door sat open exactly as she'd left it. She grabbed her bag off the floor, grabbed her keys, didn't touch the jacket, pulled the door shut behind her and moved. The office light was still on. Through the glass, the attendant sat with his newspaper. He didn't look up as she passed. She reached her car, got in, locked the doors. Her hands found the ignition and she made herself pause for 2 seconds. Just 2, before starting the engine. Because she knew that if she looked at the lot she was finished, and she needed those 2 seconds to be certain she wasn't going to. She started the car. The tire, the one with the separating tread, the one that had maybe 15 miles left in it when she'd pulled into this lot, felt different under the car's weight. Solid. She didn't examine it. She didn't get out and look. She put the car in reverse and began to move. She was almost at the lot's exit when she checked the rearview mirror. Not the lot. Not the man. Just the road behind her, she told herself. Just checking the road. The man was standing at the lot's edge, exactly where he'd been all night. And as the mirror caught him, As she registered him in that split second of rearward glance, he raised one hand. Slow, deliberate, almost formal, not threatening, not beckoning, just acknowledging. She looked away and drove. All 22 miles to the nearest town without the radio, without her phone, without anything except the sound of the road and the particular quality of silence that follows a night you can't fully explain. She stopped at the first gas station she found. Fluorescent light, open forecourt, 2 other cars at the pumps, and sat in the brightness for a long time before she trusted her legs enough to get out. The tire was perfect. Not repaired. Not changed. Perfect. No separation along the tread. Nowhere she could point to. As though it had never happened. She drove home the next morning and didn't tell anyone. 3 weeks later. City apartment. 6th floor. Deadbolts. Chain. A street full of noise and light, and people living ordinary lives below her window. Nora had been sleeping reasonably well, which she took as evidence that the body's need for rest eventually overrules even the things the mind won't let go of. She woke at 1:14 a.m. She knew the time before she looked. Knew it the way she'd known something was wrong on that West Virginia highway. Not consciously, not logically, but in the part of her that had apparently been paying closer attention than the rest of her that whole night. She lay still for a moment. City noise. A siren somewhere distant. The refrigerator's hum from the kitchen. Then, underneath it, threaded through it, something else. She got up, walked to the window, looked down at the street 6 floors below. Empty mostly. A cab moving slowly through an intersection. A figure walking a dog beneath a streetlight. And at the far edge of the pavement, where the pool of streetlight ended and the dark of the side street began, a figure in a dark coat. Still, facing her building. Facing, she understood with a certainty that had no rational foundation, her specific window. Nora stepped back from the glass. She stood in the center of her living room in the dark, and she breathed, and she told herself every reasonable thing she knew. City of millions, coincidence, exhaustion, the mind finding patterns in noise. She was still telling herself these things when the sound began. From the direction of her bedroom. From behind the closed door. Rising slowly in the silence of her apartment. The way it had risen through the walls of a motel 2 states away. Slow. Tuneless. Repeating. She didn't open the door. If this story followed you home, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me where it got you. And if you're new here, subscribe. We put out a new story every single week. The light's always on.